My brother wasn't supposed to be anywhere near my wedding day, and yet there he was, standing in the shadows of the reception tent, his eyes fixed on my fiancé like a predator sizing up prey. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The way his stare followed every movement, the way his lips curled into that half smile I remembered from our childhood, the one he wore before doing something cruel. But when I caught a glimpse of the metal lighter glinting in his palm, my stomach sank in a way I can't fully describe. I felt as if I had been thrown back into our parents' house, where chaos was always lurking behind a slammed door or a raised voice where my brother's temper was a fire of its own kind. Weddings are supposed to be days of joy, laughter, and family finally coming together. Mine started like that too. Flowers draped over the arch, the nervous shuffling of guests, the soft hum of violins warming up in the corner. I should have been focused on my dress brushing the aisle or the look in my fiancé's eyes when he first saw me, but instead there was this gnawing unease, a pulse of dread I couldn't shake. And when I smelled it, the faint, acrid scent of gasoline, it hit me that this day was about to unravel in a way no bride could ever prepare for. I had trusted that keeping my brother at a distance would protect me, but I didn't realize he had been planning something far worse than words, worse than insults or drunken outbursts. He wanted to destroy everything, and in the middle of vows and promises and family watching, I realized my wedding wasn't just about love anymore. It was about survival. I should have known the moment he showed up that the fragile piece I had built was about to shatter. My brother had always been the kind of person who thrived on chaos, who could take the happiest moment in someone else's life and turn it into ash with a single smirk or a single cruel decision. Growing up, I used to think it was anger, or maybe jealousy, but as I got older, I understood it was something darker, something hollow inside him that couldn't stand to see anyone else's joy untouched. When I spotted him at the edge of the tent, gasoline lingering in the air like an invisible warning, my body reacted before my mind caught up. My chest tightened, my throat went dry, and I felt my pulse hammer against the corset of my dress. But nobody else noticed. My mother was laughing with her friends, my bridesmaids were adjusting their hair, my fiancé was shaking hands and thanking guests. To everyone else, it was a normal wedding. To me, it was a slow countdown, each second, bringing us closer to a disaster only I seemed to sense. And that was always how it had been with my brother. His mask worked on everyone but me. I remembered nights when I'd wake up to the smell of smoke because he'd lit matches in his bedroom, just to watch the tips flare and die. I remembered finding our cat trembling under the bed, too scared to come out after he'd chased it, with fireworks. And I remembered my father's words whenever I tried to tell, "Don't exaggerate, he's just a boy." No one wanted to see it then, and no one wanted to see it now. But as I looked at that lighter glinting in his hand, I realized this time it wasn't going to end with scorch marks on the carpet or a terrified animal. This time he wanted to burn away everything I had built, the love, the promises, the family I was trying to create. And I knew, in that exact moment, that if I didn't act, he might just succeed. I tried to steady my breath, forcing a smile as guests brushed past me with champagne glasses and laughter. The band had just struck up a softer tune, violins blending with the late afternoon breeze, and everything looked perfect on the surface. The tables lined with roses, the sunlight streaming through the white canopy, my dress flowing like something out of a dream. But beneath it all, I felt like I was standing on a fault line, the earth about to crack open under my feet. My brother leaned against a post, his posture casual, almost bored. But I could see the way his fingers tapped that lighter, clicking it open and shut, the metallic snap echoing in my ears like a countdown clock. And then I smelled it again. That sharp, unmistakable scent of fuel, so faint that it was masked by the perfume of roses and the sweetness of wedding cake, but strong enough that my memory yanked me back years. Back to the time I found him in our garage with a red canister, pouring gasoline in circles on the floor just to see what would happen. He was 15, I was 12, and when I screamed for our mother, she brushed it off as childish games. But I had seen the glint in his eyes then, the same one I was seeing now. It wasn't play. It was hunger. And here, on the most important day of my life, I realized he had been waiting for this moment, saving his cruelty for when it could cut deepest. My fiancé, Daniel, was at the center of it all, completely unaware. He was laughing with his best man, adjusting his cufflinks, his eyes glowing with the kind of hope I had clung to for years. I wanted to run to him, to warn him, but something inside me froze. Because I knew if I confronted my brother too soon, if I caused a scene, he'd do it faster. He'd strike that flame and toss it before anyone could stop him. The thought made my skin crawl. I looked around desperately, searching for anyone who might notice. But my family, they never saw. They never wanted to see. And that was the cruelty of it. My brother always knew how invisible his darkness could be when hidden behind charm and denial. I realized I was alone in this, just as I had always been. Alone to protect myself, alone to protect the man I loved. My fingers clenched into the folds of my dress, nails biting through the satin, and I swore to myself, right then, that this time I wasn't going to let him win. If my brother wanted fire, then he was about to find out that I wasn't that scared, little sister anymore. I was a bride, and I had everything to lose. And if it came down to it, I would fight him with the same flames he thought he controlled. The ceremony had gone off flawlessly, at least for everyone else. Guests whispered about how radiant I looked, how lucky Daniel was, how picture-perfect the whole day seemed. But my mind wasn't resting on the vows or the champagne toasts. It was locked on the steady presence of my brother, lurking at the edges like a shadow stitched into the fabric of my happiness. When we walked back down the aisle, my veil fluttering, in the warm air and Daniel's hand gripping mine with the steady promise of forever, I caught sight of him slipping behind the catering tent. And then, a minute later, I saw a worker wrinkle his nose, waving his hand as though dismissing a strange smell. My heart plummeted. Gasoline again. That was when I realized this wasn't some vague threat. He had already started. Panic clawed at me, but I forced a smile for the photographs, held my bouquet steady as flashes went off, all while my brain screamed at me to act. How do you stop a person who's waited their whole life to ruin you? How do you expose him when no one has ever believed you before? I thought about the last time I tried. I was 16, standing in the kitchen, pointing at him with tears streaming down my face because he had locked me outside in the dead of winter, just to watch me beg, to come in. My mother had turned on me, not him. Stop being dramatic, you're embarrassing yourself. Those words never left me, and I realized with a cold certainty that if I told her now, she'd say the same thing. Except this time, it wouldn't be me freezing on a porch. It would be Daniel, doused in fuel, a human torch for my brother's cruelty. My chest tightened so hard it hurt, but I knew I had to outthink him. So I began to watch, not just him, but the flow of the entire reception. Where the staff moved, where the guests gathered, where Daniel might step away alone. My brother wasn't reckless, he was calculating, and he'd wait for the perfect pocket of time when eyes weren't on Daniel, when the music and chatter could mask the strike of a lighter. And that realization terrified me, because it meant he wasn't improvising. He had planned this. For weeks? Months? Maybe since the day I'd told him I was engaged, when his smile had been too sharp, his congratulations dripping with something poisonous. He had been patient, waiting for this exact day. And now here it was, unraveling before me like some twisted gift he had always intended to give. I wanted to run to Daniel, to tell him everything. But another thought froze me in place. If Daniel panicked, if he confronted him outright, it could trigger my brother into action instantly. And then there would be no stopping him. So instead, I played the part of the perfect bride, kissing cheeks, thanking relatives, swaying gently with Daniel during our first dance, while every nerve in my body was tuned to the faint click of a lighter and the invisible haze of fuel. My brother thought he knew me, thought I'd stay small, stay scared. But he had underestimated one thing. This wasn't just my fight anymore. This was about protecting the man I loved, the life we were building. And as the night deepened and the stars came out above the tent, I made a silent promise to myself. If my brother wanted to ignite a fire, then I would make sure the only thing that burned was him. Dinner had been served, speeches were made, Laughter filled the air, and yet underneath every toast and every clink of glass, my nerves vibrated like a wire about to snap. I watched Daniel lean in to kiss me after his best man's speech, his eyes glistening with sincerity, and in that same moment, over his shoulder, I caught sight of my brother slipping out of the tent again. It was like watching a predator circling the herd, waiting for the weak moment to strike. My mind began cataloging every possible disaster: an overturned table, an open flame from the row of candles on the dessert bar, the gas-laced air igniting before anyone even understood what was happening. The smell returned stronger when I excused myself and stepped outside. Behind the tent, in the shadows near the catering van, I found the faintest wet glisten on the grass, dark patches that shimmered under the light of a lantern. My brother had already poured it, just waiting for the spark. My hand shook as I covered my mouth, fighting down the scream rising in my throat. How could he stand there, dressed in a suit, surrounded by family who thought they knew him, and plot something so monstrous? I remembered all the times he'd smirked while I got in trouble for what he had done. The broken vase he'd blamed on me, the neighbor's shed he had damaged with fireworks, even the bruises I once carried that I swore weren't my fault. He had always found a way to twist reality until I was the liar, the problem, the overly dramatic sister. And now, on the most important day of my life, I understood the bitter truth. He wanted me to feel that same powerlessness again, only this time with stakes high enough to destroy everything in one brutal stroke. I pressed my hands against my dress to steady myself, inhaled the rose-scented air wafting from the tables inside, and forced myself back into the tent. If he thought I was blind, he was wrong. I caught his eye across the room, and for the first time, I didn't look away. His smirk widened, but this time I didn't shrink. I let my gaze harden, steady, silently telling him, "I see you. I know what you're doing. And you will not win." Something flickered in his eyes just for a second, like he hadn't expected. Resistance. And in that small crack, I saw the boy I remembered. The one who had always assumed I'd stay silent, that no one would ever believe me. But this was my wedding, my moment, and I wasn't going to let him write the ending. I felt my resolve crystallize into something sharp, something unmovable. He had chosen fire as his weapon. Fine. Then I would fight fire with truth, with evidence, with eyes on him before he could vanish back into the shadows. And as I leaned into Daniel's embrace, pretending to listen to another story about how we first met, I whispered to myself the vow I hadn't spoken at the altar. I would not let my brother burn my life to the ground. Not today, not ever. The mayor. Band shifted into louder music, couples filled the dance floor, and the hum of voices grew thick inside the tent. To anyone looking in, it was the perfect wedding. Women twirling in chiffon, children chasing bubbles in the grass, champagne glasses, catching the glow of string lights. But my world had narrowed to a single point: my brother's movements. He was never far, always at the periphery, sipping a drink he didn't pay for, laughing too loudly at jokes, nodding when someone congratulated him as though he belonged there. And yet, every so often, I saw the way his hand slid into his pocket, brushing the outline of that lighter. It wasn't nerves. It was ritual. Anticipation. My stomach clenched each time. Daniel pulled me into another dance, his arm firm around my waist, his smile so radiant it hurt to meet his eyes. He deserved a night untouched by shadows, a celebration that honored the life we were about to build. Instead, I was scanning for candles, for lanterns, for any careless guest who might stumble too close to the darkened edges of the lawn. My brother was patient, waiting for the crowd to swell, for the music to rise, for the cover of chaos. That was when I noticed the catering staff whispering by the bar, frowning as one of them lifted a tray with damp edges. A sick jolt hit me, gasoline again. He hadn't just poured it outside. He had marked multiple places, hidden his traps where no one would notice until it was too late. And that's when the realization sank in. This wasn't just about hurting Daniel. It was about spectacle. My brother wanted the fire to consume, the entire evening to turn joy into terror, to watch people scatter like insects while he stood in the center of the storm. It wasn't enough to ruin my happiness. He wanted to stain it so deeply that even the memory of my wedding would reek of smoke and fear. My mind raced. I couldn't scream it out. Guests would panic and he'd strike before anyone could stop. Him. I couldn't quietly slip away either. He'd follow, and Daniel would be left exposed. The only choice was to force the truth into the open, to draw every pair of eyes to him before he could act. But how? My family had ignored years of warnings, turned me into the problem child, the liar, the one who overreacted. If I pointed at him now without proof, they'd roll their eyes. And then he would light the match. I felt Daniel's breath warm against my ear as he whispered, "You okay? You're trembling." My throat tightened. Tears pricked my eyes. But I nodded. I couldn't. Tell him? Not yet. If Daniel charged at him, if my brother felt cornered, the night would end in flames. So I pressed my forehead against Daniel's shoulder and steadied my voice. "Just hold me, just for now." He smiled softly, thinking I was overwhelmed with joy, and in that cruel irony, I found my strength. Because even if no one else believed me, I had seen the truth with my own eyes. And I wasn't that helpless girl anymore, begging to be let in from the cold. This time I would be the one holding the key. As the music swelled and the night deepened, I knew exactly what I had to do. The evidence was out there, in the damp grass, the reeking trays, the faint shimmer where the liquid clung. If I could expose it before his hand struck the lighter, if I could make the crowd see what he'd done, then his smirk would finally crumble. He thought fire was his weapon, but tonight I would turn his own flames into a spotlight and let the entire world see him for what he really was. The night air had turned cooler, and I could feel a draft seeping into the tent as the sides swayed, gently, in the breeze. The laughter of my friends blended with the clinking of glassware and the faint strains of a violin, but all of it sounded muffled to me, as though I was underwater. My eyes never left my brother. He moved like a phantom, from group to group, slipping behind conversations, laughing at punchlines he didn't hear, his posture loose but his eyes always hunting. And then, as if to taunt me, he pulled the lighter fully from his pocket and flicked it once, just once. A small flash of fire illuminated his face before he snapped it shut. No one else saw. I did. And it nearly buckled my knees. I gripped the edge of a table to steady myself, forcing my lips into a smile when an ant complimented my gown. I muttered a thank you, but inside I was calculating, spinning, desperate. I couldn't let this become another story no one believed. I remembered too clearly the countless times I had tried to call him out as children. The time I found scorched matches hidden under his pillow. The time he locked our neighbor's kid in the shed and struck sparks outside just to scare him. Each time my parents shook their heads at me, "Don't cause drama, stop tattling." And each time, my brother walked away smug, untouchable. But now, my wedding was the stage, and this time I would not let him leave with that same smirk. I scanned the tent again, my gaze catching on the dessert table, candles flickering along. The frosted cakes, dangerously close to the damp cloth he must have soaked when no one was looking. It clicked into place. That was his target. He wanted Daniel nearby when it went up, wanted chaos to erupt around the man I loved. My skin went cold. Daniel was only a few steps away, laughing with his groomsmen, oblivious to the death trap laid, just yards from him. I felt fury coil inside me, hot and sharp. All these years I had been silenced, dismissed, ignored. But this time I wasn't the helpless little sister. This time I wasn't going to whisper warnings that no one heard. This time I would make them see. I straightened my back, lifted my chin, and forced my voice to cut through the chatter. "Something's wrong with the tables." It came out steady, sharp, commanding. Heads turned. A few guests frowned, glancing where I pointed. My brother froze, his hand gripping the lighter too tightly. For the first time, he looked rattled. I walked toward the dessert bar, every step deliberate, every eye following me now. "Smell it," I said louder, my tone firm but calm. "Does anyone else smell that?" And then a murmur swept the room, because yes, they did. One by one, guests wrinkled their noses, realizing the acrid sting beneath the perfume of flowers and food. A catering staff member bent down, touched the damp cloth, and his eyes widened in shock. "It's fuel," he muttered, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. The tent erupted in gasps. People pulled back, chairs scraped against the floor, and in that chaos I turned to my brother, locking eyes with him across the crowd. For the first time in my life, I had witnesses. The mask he had always worn was slipping, his smirk faltering as whispers spread. This wasn't my paranoia anymore. This was proof. And as Daniel rushed to my side, shielding me with his arm, I realized the tide had finally turned. My brother wasn't the hunter anymore. He was cornered, and the fire he thought would destroy me had just lit up the truth for everyone else to see. The moment the staff confirmed it was gasoline, the mood inside the tent shifted like a storm cloud, blotting out the sun. Guests stumbled back from the tables, voices rising in alarm, and all eyes turned toward my brother. For once, there was no escape hatch for him, no easy lie, no family willing to dismiss my words as hysteria. He stood frozen, the lighter still clutched in his hand, his face pale under the glow of the lanterns. The smirk he had carried like armor his entire life faltered, cracked, and then vanished altogether. Daniel stepped in front of me, his arm firm across my shoulders, his voice steady but hard as he addressed him. "What were you planning to do?" My brother opened his mouth, closed it, then let out a laugh that rang hollow in the tense silence. "You're overreacting," he tried, but the smell of gasoline and the damp stains on the ground spoke louder than he ever could. Whispers surged through the crowd, disbelieving, horrified. For once, I wasn't the one sounding the alarm alone. Everyone could see, smell, and feel the truth. One of Daniel's friends had already called the police, and when the flashing lights lit up the driveway minutes later, I felt a weight lift from my chest that had been there for years. Officers questioned him, took the lighter from his trembling hand, and led him away under a chorus of stunned silence. I should have felt pity. He was still my brother, but instead I felt something far stronger: relief, justice, freedom. The rest of the night was a blur. Guests whispered, shaken, but Daniel kept me close, reminding me with every glance that we had survived. The fire never touched us. It never would. For once, my brother hadn't gotten away with his cruelty. For once, the evidence was undeniable. The tent quieted and the crowd thinned. I found myself standing alone under the stars, the air cool against my skin. I thought of all the years I'd spent silenced, dismissed, made to feel small. And then I thought of how it ended tonight, with me standing tall, with the truth finally visible to everyone, with the fire turned back on him. When Daniel joined me, slipping his hand into mine, I whispered the words that felt like the truest vow I'd ever made. He doesn't get to burn us down. Not now, not ever. And for the first time in my life, I truly believed it.